Crikey. Well, apart from writing this, I mean, I've done another little booklet which is actually about that.
Yeah.
So perhaps you should stock it and sell it.
Well, I'm sure we will.
But in there, I say things like, even if the project's generated by the community, somebody has to be in charge. Somebody has to make sure it's all done. And you need what I described as a charismatic character to run it. But Teresa added awkward, because she was thinking of me, you see. And really, it's a case of just grafting on people who've got some knowledge or some experience or some interest. What you shouldn't do is say to the village, we're going to do this project, who wants to get involved?
Mm-hmm.
Because you'll never cope with the 500 people that'll volunteer.
Mm.
You know, we built ours up gradually to a dozen.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that is at Winscombe, not Shapwick. Shapwick actually was only about 15 most of the time. And then there are certain things you need to do. I mean, if he says before Victorian era, then you need to see what maps are available,
right,
and what medieval documents are available, and you need to look at the buildings. People always forget about the buildings, but the buildings are sort of layer one of the archaeology, you know, they're the upstanding bit.
Yes.
And here we had all the buildings looked at that were on the, I think it was the 1880s map, with some amazing, surprising results, you know. The main one, which was the manor house, which turns out to be a 15th century building. But I think perhaps the main piece is take a bit of advice.
Yes.
You know, talk to other people who've done projects like it and the pitfalls and stuff like that.
And you think it's important to have someone involved with
someone in
experience.
charge, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a popular thing to say because these things are all supposed to be spontaneous and democratic, but actually they are research projects, and therefore somebody has to be responsible for writing the stuff up and publicising it and steering it, you know.
Yeah.
And I mean, somebody's got to talk to the landowners. You know, somebody's got to apply for money. And
yes, because I suppose you're very much reliant on, like you were saying the other day, the Farmers Corporation. And
yeah. Here, at Shapwick, the estate belonged to Lord Vestey, and there was a land agent who worked at Cirencester. And looking back on it, that was critical to make contact with him, to agree things with him, for him to be comfortable with what we were doing. And there was really only one major landowner. Where I'm working now, there's shed loads of small landowners, and it's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare to find out who owns what and get permission off them. You know?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the other thing. You know, if it's a parish or a village with one landowner, it's going to be a lot easier. You know, if it's got lots and lots and lots of landowners, and you know that most of them are awkward, go and find somewhere else. Don't even think about it. It's just hard work.
That sounds like a good tip.
Now that is a very good question, because normally you'd say field walk the fields and you find the pottery of different dates, and if you find early medieval pottery, Anglo-Saxon pottery, that's where the settlements are.
Right.
But in the West Country, nobody makes pottery, as far as we can tell, before about 900 AD. You know, they stopped making it the Roman period, and there's a 500-year gap.
Yeah.
So you can't walk the fields and find the debris. And archaeologists are lost without pottery. They really are. And it used to worry me. I mean, why I didn't think of it to start with, I don't know, but it used to worry me. And it's this thing that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Right?
Yes.
Just because you can't find anything doesn't mean they're not there. And I agonised about this, and in the end a colleague of mine at Bristol said, well, have you thought about heavy metals in the soil? And I quite like that, you know, and Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple and all that, you see. But what it was that where people have lived on the site and particularly where they've been to the loo, and where their animals have been to the loo, it affects the soil, and it will stay affected for a very long time.
Right.
So if you take soil samples and look at the complement of elements in the sample you've got, you can tell whether there's been human occupation or not. And I think perhaps the greatest contribution in some ways at Shapwick was the heavy metal analysis of soil samples. And when people buy the book, right, there's a site called Shapwick, which was a case in point where the name of the field, Shapwick, suggests a farm site with the wick name, you see. And we field walked it because it was ploughed, and what we got basically was broken field drains and a few bits of Roman pottery. Now, almost any field in England has got a few bits of Roman pottery in it because of manuring and debris and stuff. So we then had some geophysics done on it, and that showed some very strange anomalies. And then we had the heavy metal samples done, and there was this blob in the middle of the field of a high concentration of lead. And so we dug a hole in it, and there was a little Roman building with shed loads of pottery and coins and burials, children's burials, all sorts of things.
Wow.
And we wouldn't have spotted it from just walking the field.
Yes.
So it proved actually that, you know, the concentrations of different elements was a good indicator.
Fantastic.
You know, I think that there's not much of it been done since because it's very expensive. You've got to have a lab basically. But I'd have thought that in future it's something that people ought to develop a lot more. So yeah, that's just one example.
Yeah.
Well, they come along rather late, actually. Well, I mean, religion. I mean, every group, probably ever, seems to have had some sort of belief system, and you know, usually belief in some sort of deity and life after death and all that sort of stuff. But certainly in Shapwick, there was a church from probably about 700. But it was outside where the later village was.
Right.
And then in the 14th century they moved, or they built a church to replace the one outside the village in the middle of the village. So in that sense it was very much a latecomer. That's not normally true, I don't think. I think often the church is one of the earliest features in a village. But I don't think I really buy into the idea of it having an influence on where the village is or the shape of the village or anything like that. Churches tend to start out as appendages to the manor houses of the guy who owns, and it's always a guy, who owns the village and owns the parish, and he provides a church eventually for his family, and that eventually becomes the parish church. So that's the link, I think. It doesn't matter if there's a village or not. You know?
Yeah.
Yes, to the last bit, which is why I asked Victor Ambrose to do me a coloured painting of people dismantling their farms and carting the building materials to the new village to put up their farm there. And I thought that would really sort of, you know, encapsulate what had gone on. And I would. There's a lot of debate about it, but I think it's coercion. But then I'm a terrible Marxist, you know. I see the people doing the farm work as one group and the idle lords as something else, you know. So and my experience of life is basically the powerful and the wealthy do tell other people what to do. You know, that's not a you know, that's not an odd thing to say. It's how the world works.
Yeah.
But the answer to his question actually is that I think somewhere in the process is the the sort of vast amount of cereals that were produced. And I think that's what it's about. And it's interesting, the contrast with what I'm working on now, this parish at Winscombe in North Somerset, with Shapwick.
Yeah.
Because you could see Shapwick as a big cereals producing factory.
Right.
You know, the land is organised to grow as much cereals as possible. The labour force is organised to work the land to grow as much cereal as possible. Whereas where I live, which is a dispersed settlement in Winscombe, it's all about cattle production, sheep production, horse rearing, you know, and the arable doesn't figure very much. The thing about arable is that before modern machinery, it is incredibly labour intensive. You know, you've got those 8 oxen and a plough and 2 ploughmen, and you're trying to plough an acre a day, and there's hundreds of acres to plough, and then somebody's got to scatter the seed, and then somebody's got to keep the weeds off, and somebody's got to keep the crows off, and then when it's ripe, you know, an army has to harvest it. And we know that, don't we? Because the whole of the academic year is still structured to release people in July and August to get the harvest in. You know?
Yeah.
School kids still break up in July. You know, universities still stop. And the reason was every hand was necessary to get the crop in. So, I think villages really it's a concentration of labour. And it's interesting that what comes in with it is a lot of regulation. You know, the manorial court rolls and records and the customals of the duties of different people, how many days labour they owe, and all this sort of stuff all comes in with that.
Right.
So I think villages are about cereal production, and yes, I think it's about coercion. Well, I mean, without knowing the details of where he is, that's sort of what I think,
Right.
and a number of other people do. That and again, it's this contrast between common fields and villages, like Shapwick, with a lack of woodland or a lack of much woodland, and places that have scattered farms and hamlets, often with lots of commons, as he says, which is which Winscombe's got. And, you know, if you play around with the doomsday figures, for example, you can often show that the area was formerly more wooded. Or there might be, I mean, I don't think it applies where he lives, but there might be Royal Forest records and things that show that. And, I mean, I think what tends to happen is that a lot of the nucleated villages with common fields are in areas which have been farmed for a very long time. When you look at the Shapwick material, it's quite clear that landscape has been farmed, probably for arable, for about 6,000 years, 5,000 years. Whereas other areas, like the sort of area he's talking about, you get the impression that it was people have been chopping bits of wood out and growing crops, and then it's been grown over with wood again, and then they've chopped a bit more out of somewhere else. And the fact is they've got a reserve of timber trees that they're using for, you know, timber frame buildings like the one he lives in. And I mean, that's exactly the trick, get it dendro-dated. That's the date of the felling of those trees. And I'm sure if he did the whole village, they may have done the whole village, but you'd probably find a lot of it was 15th, 16th century. And by which time they're starting to actually conserve the trees and the wood, because there's been so much erosion of it. But tell him to start a whole parish survey. There's not enough of these dispersed villages and scattered hamlet parishes been done, you see.
Right. Okay. Well, that's interesting.
More people need to tackle them. They're hard work. That's the trouble. They're really hard work. One's tempted to say always the last one. You know?
Yeah.
you get to a point with them where you're absolutely fed up with them. And when you think that we worked in the field at Shapwick for 10 years, and then it's effectively taken another 10 years to, you know, first of all get the big fat volume out and then get this one out.
Yeah.
You never want to see it again, really. And the trouble is, I think they're a bit like girlfriends projects are. You know, you're dead keen to start with, and you put a lot of effort in, and then the magic wears off, and you start to look around for the next one. And you have to make sure you finish the last one before you. So, I mean, I'm quite excited about the one I'm doing at the moment, and we're likely to do just a very small study of another place,
Right.
which we've just begun to look at. So yeah, always the last one, really.
Right.
Well, I think methodologically, if I can put it like that, I think it's probably better than anywhere else. You know, there's, how can I put it really? There's, in other countries, I get the impression that it's very tightly ruled by the sort of aged professors like me who run institutes and run archaeology departments, and it's very difficult for newcomers and youngsters to get very far until somebody dies, you know. Whereas here it's a bit more fluid than that. I mean, I've just spent a week in Durham teaching, and on the one hand, they don't seem to mind what I say, and I don't care what I say to them. And actually, it doesn't matter if one of the undergraduates, you know, comes up with some criticism or some sharp comments, you know, that's all part of the sort of development of the debate, really. You know, I get the impression it isn't quite like that in some other countries. But I think, and perhaps it's connected with that, the different methodologies we use, and the fact that we're quite experimental, really. I mean, I know people have said, for example, people from abroad have said to me that they can't believe that we used machines, you know, JCBs and stuff like that, when we were doing the time team programs. But, you know, I've seen people drive a machine just like a mechanical trowel. It's as delicate, it's as careful, you know. So, you know, we are very sort of innovative and experimental and so on. And I mean, the whole business I mentioned to you a moment ago, you know, the heavy metal analysis, you know, all that sort of stuff. I mean, the whole idea of landscape archaeology, where, if you like, the landscape is an archaeological site, and it's possible to unravel it and understand it. You know, that's a sort of British thing originally. So it's a William Hoskins making the English landscape thing originally. I mean, it's caught on all over the world now, but again, it's we're quite good at that sort of trying things out, you know.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where do you start? You know? I mean, if he's thinking of periods and types of site and things like that, then almost any type of site in almost any period needs more work.
Right.
If he's thinking of the way the whole thing is conducted, you know, from how we teach it, from field work, from aerial survey, through to excavation, through to conservation, through to museum, stores, museum displays, you know, every aspect is a shambles.
Right.
And it wouldn't matter what you'd do to it, it would improve it. And it is to be hoped that, you know, I mean, nothing will happen while the forces of darkness and evil are stalking the land again. Right? Make sure you get that bit.
Just checking. Yeah, it's recording.
You know, all this paranoia about saving money and not spending public money, and you know, it's lethal to this sort of thing. You know, this is not, we're not talking about more hospitals and better schools and things, all the essential things everybody agrees to that state money should be spent on. We're talking about the things that add a quality of life. to people's lives. And those are the things that are being butchered, left, right and centre. And archaeology is one of the things that's going to get butchered. So, you know, it's all in a terrible state, really. We're not strong enough or influential enough with politicians, unlike, say, the bird people, or the twittery fluttery brigade, as I call them. You know, archaeology, in terms of jobs, and so on, could disappear tomorrow. So, I mean, the answer to that question is everything needs doing.
Yeah.
I think everything is in a parlous state, and almost any period or topic needs research. It's a bit all-embracing, isn't it? Well, I think the answer is disguised. You know, there's what people try and portray is that what is so-called responsible metal detecting, which is basically those people that ask permission, don't work on scheduled sites, and report everything to Portable Antiquities Scheme, is seen as okay. Those that work at night without permission and sell the stuff on eBay and everywhere is seen as not responsible. But the trouble is that in the end, it just isn't the way to do an investigation of the past. You know, archaeology has taken the best part of 400 years to develop. There's a particular methodology to it. There's a particular ethos to it, which says that you know, when you dig stuff up, it belongs to everybody and therefore should be in the museum, not on the mantel shelf of the particular metal detectorist who's found it, and that we're not interested in its value. We're interested in its value academically or intellectually, or what it tells us about the past, not how much it'll fetch on eBay. So that I think the differences in approach, the differences in belief and all the rest of it have been papered over, the cracks have been papered over. There's definitely a feeling that archaeologists can't criticise metal detectorists, whereas if you talk to them in private, we just don't like the idea. I mean, there's a fairly fundamental problem, which is that most people in the past didn't have much metal. You know, they didn't have many coins, they didn't have much ironwork, they certainly didn't have much stuff like bronze work. So if you're interested in the past, a pottery detector would be good, a flint detector would be good, but not a metal detector. You're going to get a really biased view of that. I mean, there's no doubt about it that there's a lot of useful stuff has come out, for example, in the distribution of Anglo-Saxon coins, you know, areas of trading, stuff like that. But it's at the expense that the stuff isn't in the museum. It's not there for future scholars to examine or re-examine. You know, the fact that the Portable Antiquities Scheme takes a photograph of something and has it drawn and has it published, and then it goes back to the finder, means that if somebody comes along in 5 years' time with a new metallurgical technique, you know, or a new way of working out how stuff was made or where the metal came from, which is exactly the sort of thing that happens in archaeology, then this stuff won't be available. And my real fear is, and I talked to the people up in South Staffordshire, you know, where they found the hoard, the Bloxwich metal detecting club, and I said, what on earth is going to happen when you die? Right? Yes. And they hadn't thought of this, and they said, what do you mean? I said, well, unless you're very, very careful, your relatives will chuck the whole lot in the skip, because that's what happens. It happens with, you know, archaeologists, it happens with, you know, unless you're very careful to say that a museum must have your records, or a record office must have your paperwork, you know, it just gets trashed by relatives who clearly have got more on their mind than saving an historical record at the time. I mean, I'm busy sending all my stuff to Taunton Museum and the Record Office now, because I don't want to lumber my relatives with the problem later on. And that's another worry, you see. If this stuff remains in private possession, a lot of it will disappear. In Shapwick, drawing attention to the book again, right? In Shapwick there are something like, oh I don't know, let's say 8 or 9 hoards of Roman coins have been found, including the last one, which was the one that they got 300,000 quid for this hoard of coins. Right, now that is now in Taunton Museum, because Taunton Museum had to raise the money to buy it. But of the previous hoards that were found right back to the 18th century, the only ones that exist now are the ones in Taunton Museum. In other words, if you go to the museum, they remain looked after and intact. If they stay out with the finders, they get dispersed. So, you know, there's a lesson. If the stuff isn't in a museum, under lock and key, with the records are boxed up, the chances are it'll disappear. Oh, thank God it's only 1 day visit. No antibiotics, you see. Well, perhaps I can give 2 answers to that. One is that, which is to do with the theme of the Shapwick project and book, which would be to see that day, in many cases it must have been a day, when they said, okay, we're taking this farm down now, where you've lived out in the sticks, out in the fields for generations, and we're going to move you into this new village we've laid out. And that, I mean, that must have been as much of an upheaval as the enclosure of the fields with hedges was in the 18th century or 17th century or whatever, you know, and there was this open countryside and suddenly it had all these new fences and new hedges put in, dramatically changed it. So I think that would be a very interesting, so you could talk to them and say, well, why has this happened? Why are you doing this? What have they told you? You know, is there a good reason for it? But I think the other one, which is surprising coming from me perhaps, because I tend to spend my time in the post-Roman period, is to go right back to when agriculture comes in. So you have, I mean, we arbitrarily divided up the Mesolithic, the Middle Stone Age, when people are hunter-gatherers, really quite sophisticated hunter-gatherers. And then by the Neolithic, they're beginning to farm and domesticate animals and so on. And a lot of the anthropological evidence suggests that this is a much more labour-intensive activity. Marshall Salins, who wrote a splendid book called Stone Age Economics, which is a really good read, interviewed a lot of horticulturalists and farmers around so-called primitive groups around the world, and then talked to hunter-gatherers who lived nearby and said, well, why aren't you doing what they're doing, you know? And I remember there was one group in New Guinea or somewhere, and there were a group that were basically hunters, and there was a group that had gardens and pigs. And when he said, well, why don't you do what they do, that is to the hunter-gatherers, why don't you do what the people with the garden, the pigs, that's just too much like hard work. All that, you know. And if you look at the sort of Mesolithic economy, I think the main activity of the day is sleeping under the tree, and then the next main activity is visiting relatives over the hill, and then some way down the list comes going and getting dinner, you know. So it makes you wonder why people went in for that, and I mean there's a huge amount of stuff written about it and books about it and so on. But I think it'd be very interesting. At the point they said, well, okay, you know, we're convinced, we'll try growing some grain and we'll try domesticating these sheep or whatever, you know. Why would you do that rather than go and hunt something, you know? So those two, but only for 1 day. I'm glad that lady said only 1 day, because, you know, there's no doubt about it, the best time to live is now. You know, as soon as you get the flu or something, you realise that it's better to live now, you know. Because it's the best study of a parish and a village that's been done in this country so far. And you know, that sounds terribly conceited, but if you look at the one that came out very recently was Michael Wood's book. And Michael Woods is a good bloke, he does good television programmes, he writes well, and it's an interesting book. But this is much more complete in terms of how you look at a settlement and what you can get out of it.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
And it's a snip of the prize.
Thank you very much, Mick.
Okay. That's a very long answer,
No, but
without any swearing in it at all.
to be commended.